Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Garrett. I am a full professor of sport management here at Loras College, where I also coordinate the sport management program. I'm recording this for a wide, diverse group of individuals who both participated in this particular research, who were just interested in learning more. And I thank you all very much for that interest. It is May 9th, about quarter to 11 in the morning. Beautiful sunny day here. And we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I will also kind of move this so we can get the slideshow complete. And so again, right, this is what I've been doing on sabbatical this semester. I'm looking at Division III recruiting and that relationship between coaching staffs and the admissions officers, and then messaging to recruits not projected to contribute at the varsity level. And we'll obviously we'll get into this. So overview, right? I'll offer a disclaimer. I'll talk about the backstory and the purpose of this. I will discuss the research process, the methodology, et cetera, right? I think you'll learn. I don't need to necessarily read slides word for word on this. We'll end with some recommendations and a conclusion. So first, I guess a disclaimer, and again, there's a diverse group that's going to be watching this particular recording. There's parents, there are coaches, there are administrators. And I think one thing that comes up is, first of all, keep in mind everything that is said here is anonymous. Don't get into a guessing game of who said what. I don't think that's productive. It won't do you much good. But there will be some things. There will be some quotes here that potentially some could take offense at, right? Offense at their profession, thinking that it's a personal jab at them. I can say too, though, that from all the interviews that I did, that nothing was ever intended to be personal. All right. So a little bit of my background. So right, you know my current position. I started. So I've been involved in recruiting in a lot of different ways. Currently, I guess I'm the lead recruiter here for our sport management program at Loras. I was a college coach in a different life. I was a graduate assistant women's basketball and softball coach at Illinois Wesleyan, where basically I was the recruiting coordinator. I then moved on and was a head women's basketball coach at Blackburn College in Carlinville, Illinois, where again, both at Illinois Wesleyan and at Blackburn, we were fortunate enough to have record classes. My master's thesis was on Division III research things, but specific to some of the CCIW schools. My doctoral dissertation was looked at St. Louis University and whether or not first years who matriculated there, how much that Catholic identity played in a role. So I guess college choice and recruiting has always been an interest of mine. Now, again, the impetus of this, right? So, and I've been a parent who's played that role as well, right? Both my kids, my oldest son was a college athlete. My middle son is. I ran a Dubuque Hornets baseball franchise for a lot of our players went on to compete Division III. So parents typically will ask me a lot of different questions on things. And again, now to go back to that impetus, right? I think what I've seen really throughout a gradual increase throughout in the entire 21st century, right, is we know that small colleges can be struggling at times. And they are using athletics more to leverage enrollment. And one of the things that's happened to that, we've seen roster sizes increase. And at what point, and this is one of the questions that's going to be asked, at what point are those roster sizes increasing to the point that opportunities really aren't fully existent? And then and then what really kind of came from that, so that's always been on the back of my mind is this whole thing of roster sizes are getting too large for legitimate opportunities. I had a student here, right? And, we recruited him for sport management. He was also being recruited by a sport. I knew that particular coaching staff saw him as a quote unquote admissions recruit or roster filler. Wasn't my place to tell that student that, right? I don't speak for coaches on those sort of recruiting visits, but knew that was the case. And when he got here, it was a real difficult transition for him because all this, and I remember him confiding, and it's like, well, gosh, I thought I was on I'm barely on the head coach's radar. The coaches barely know who I am. I mean, I'm not getting any attention from them. We have a freshman class of 20 kids, what's going on? Now, this young man successfully, is doing great academically. He did play a couple JV years and then moved on, right? So he didn't become the great success story where he worked so hard and earned a varsity spot, but he's doing well at the college and actually wound up doing another sport where he's doing well at. I've had other students, once they learned of this research, also come up to me and say, you know, gosh, yeah, I didn't realize that our freshman recruiting class was going to be that big. I was surprised. I was dismayed. I was disappointed. And certainly that's not a knock on Loras College, because that's really happening at every school I talk to, and is happening at several schools really throughout the Midwest. All right. So that was a little bit of the impetus for that. So what's the purpose then, right? One, to explore that working relationship between coaching staffs and admissions professionals at D3 schools, right? I know that it's not always perfect. It's not always ideal. And then maybe even more importantly, to research the messaging that these prospective student athletes are getting from different constituents when the coaches aren't really projecting them to be varsity contributors. So that's kind of the purpose. So the research process, right? I went and got all the necessary IRB approval. This is a qualitative study, right? Glessney really says that qualitative studies, it allows the researcher to listen to other stories, interpret them, and then tell their stories. So hopefully that's what I'm doing well here. This was designed to be a stratified random sample, right? So this was to be for Division III schools in Iowa. And, you know, there was, I got all the coaching rosters, and it was random as to who got picked, but I was trying to stratify it to ensure equal representation of the sports. That didn't happen. All right. And I'll explain a little bit further, but we certainly had some underrepresented sports, primarily because some coaches just didn't want to do it, right? No one had to do this. And in some other cases, some athletic directors that I was working with wanted to make some adjustments. There are limitations with any study, right? I mean, 31 coaches, which really out of, if you look at a sample in Iowa, that's pretty good. But here's some limitations, right? Most of the schools, with one exception being Cornell, these schools all participate in the American Rivers Conference, which really would be, if we use Division I terminology, would be a Power 5 conference. You know, right now, the American Rivers Conference leads all Midwestern conferences of small private colleges and Learfield points. There's no state schools, right? This very well would probably be a different result that I would get if I was talking to Wisconsin Whitewater or SUNY Cortland or things like that, where those schools might not need to leverage enrollment enough through athletics. No research ones, right? You know, Loras and University of Dubuque and Co., you know, they're not WashU, they're not Johns Hopkins in terms of their overall scope of who they are as an institution. And also, all these schools are very strong academic schools, right? The Williams, the Amherst are often considered, you know, the mini Ivy League. And so none of those schools were represented here as well. And of course, there's some biases, right? I work here at Loras. I'm on a first name basis with all the coaches here, and we all have a positive working relationship with them. I have former students coaching here, coaching at the University of Dubuque, coaching at Simpson. The only coach that I threw out for not being able to be selected randomly was Loras's baseball coach, where my middle son currently is on the roster. And then another bias, you know, experience with admissions. I mean, great admissions professionals here at Loras, but hey, over time, I've been here 17 years. I've had some disagreements with them concerning the recruitment of a sport management class. All right. So, but what I really don't want, and hopefully it doesn't come out this way, this is not meant to be an admissions bashing presentation. And of course, with the research, all these things were anonymous. And I also really kind of disguised or coded their responses if they talked about, if it was other way identifiable. So de-identified, that's the best way I want to use it. Sorry, I'm flubbing a little bit. Okay, so these were the 7 schools that participated, right? 7 schools here, all here in Iowa. Grinnell elected not to participate, and they might have been an outlier anyway. And Wartburg and Central just repeatedly never responded to things, and which is somewhat unfortunate, because there was definitely, which came up, Wartburg and Central got referenced by some of the coaches that I was talking to. But hey, we were happy to get the 7 schools that we did: Simpson, Buena Vista, Loras, Co., University of Dubuque, Cornell, and Luther. So a little bit of demographic data, right? This is a qualitative study, but there is still some numbers there that we could look at. And a big thank you to Mason McMillan, one of our students, and Professor Bill Hitchcock in our business program that helped me crunch some of the numbers, which really showed nothing significant, but I think it's still important just to say what we looked at. And so the whole thing was, in some of the interview questions that we'll get to, we looked at, can you cut, and who determines your roster size? Those questions, and we tried to correlate, was there anything significant statistically between the longevity of the coach, right? The median was 5 years, the mean six, almost 7, in terms of how long that head coach has been the head coach at their current institution. Maybe they've been a head coach for longer. Roster size, gender. Now, the sports were pretty much equal between men and women's sports, but more men's coaches. Individual or team sport. Program success, either determined by Learfield points of the school or by the coaches I was talking to. Did their program finish in the top third, second third, or bottom third of their conference? Admissions data from IPEDS, the federal government site where all this is available, school enrollment, percentage of student athletes, yield, which is the number of students that matriculate based off who's been accepted. So all those things, right? There really just wasn't anything significant from that. And again, thank you to Mason and Professor Hitchcock. So these were the sports represented, right? I indicated earlier that, so this was not ideal. I do think track and field was overrepresented. At the same time, you see some of the sports that maybe were underrepresented. Sports had to be a sport that the American Rivers Conference offered. So also men's volleyball, lacrosse programs were not considered. Overall, we have 20 women's sports and 23 men's sports. So that's fairly accurate. I think that what I really want to point out here is, you see that football had one. Football really, I think that's unfortunate that they were underrepresented. So I just had some football coaches that were selected that didn't want to do it. Because as a reoccurring theme throughout the data, we'll talk about football. We'll get to that. I think one of the things also, there were certainly individual sports are fairly represented here. And that also really comes into play later. And I learned a lot about, I knew they were different, but I really learned how they were different as it pertains to recruiting and opportunities. These are the interview questions. I don't need to read these to you word for word, and actually they're going to show up again when we actually get to the data. So these were the first 4. Of course, you can pause this on your own, right? And then these are the second 4. So 8 interview questions, total. We'll get to those. But let's talk about some of the background research, right? So there was other research I did besides the 31 interviews with coaches. I did other interviews with representatives throughout the higher education industry. And of course, and also you have to do the review of literature. So we'll get to some of that. So the review of literature, I'm going to look at 5 different things here, right? The importance of athletics at D3 schools, why student athletes matriculate where they do, some of the ethics in this, the roles of the coach in admissions, and then examples of congruence and conflict. So we'll start with the importance of athletics at D3 schools. So it's an anonymous author, because I did this for the Sports Innovation Journal. I happen to be a reviewer. And the author, I like this quote, right? That athletics is there to leverage the brand equity, the image, to recruit potential students, retain, solicit donations from alumni. So athletics plays a big role at D3 schools. President Jeff Docking at Adrian College, and I read his book, and I also had the great opportunity to interview him. The Adrian model, right? How he came in, and when Adrian, didn't quite have a strong enrollment, and used athletics and other extracurricular opportunities to really bolster the enrollment. The Lindenwood model, probably somewhat there in Missouri, came a little bit before that, but the Adrian model really is pretty well known. And even more recently, down at Fontbonne, which is a Division III school in St. Louis, Roboke in the St. Louis Business Journal talked about how Fontbonne is starting a Midwest Sprint League football for players 178 pounds or less. They're looking to add 42 men to their school as a direct result of this. And I'm assuming women could play as well, but they're looking to add some men's numbers. And they're doing this also as part of an overall re-looking at athletic team sizes. The percentage of the student body, according to the NCAA Division III, student athletes comprise 27% of the student body nationally. Again, that keeps in mind a lot of the larger schools, such as the WashUs and Wisconsin, Wisconsin Oshkosh, et cetera. 38% of the schools that were part of the study, but even I think that's a bit low. Because at Buena Vista, their IPEDS data shows a number that really includes a lot of their satellite campuses. And when you really talk about their Storm Lake campus, and even people I talked to at BV would suggest that it's significantly higher. So that actually is probably easily in the 40%. All right, which that brings some other questions and concerns for some additional research. Now, retention, right? Hofstadter did a study of retention of Division III football programs, mostly on the East Coast. So no Midwestern schools were part of that particular study. That and Hofstadter's results pretty much said, well, didn't pretty much say, said that 40% of the football men will be retained from freshman year to sophomore year. That means 60% of the guys leave the team at the rosters that he studied. Didn't mean that they all left the school, but a good chunk of them did as well. Retention will play a role again throughout this particular research. Why do student athletes matriculate where they do? All right. One, throughout the whole recruiting process, even at the Division III level, the average recruit is being recruited by 7 to 10 schools. And these high school kids report it's too much. Too many schools are contacting them. They're getting too many touches. It's overwhelming. The influencers, parents and relatives remain, according to the research, the primary influencers in the decision. Yes, teachers, guidance counselors, coaches, both high school and club play a role, but it really is the parents and relatives. And then what are some of the reasons, right, that the research would suggest? Proximity to home, and really this has been magnified a bit in COVID. And right, I know here at several of the schools I interviewed, this wasn't part of my research, but just things that I know, that they're looking for niches outside the Midwest, because again, high school graduates, the numbers are decreasing in the Midwest. And so there are schools, I mean, Loras included, Simpson included, Wartburg, that they're trying to do more in Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Florida. Okay, that was a technology glitch. All of a sudden we went off, we went off the air. Sorry about that. Not sure what the heck happened there, but we will go back to, go back to where I was. Sorry about that. Anyway, we were looking at some of the the research, and we talked about that. Why pick where they go, the proximity to home, academics according to the NCAA research, was one of the things, and then opportunity to play, which again does come in as we talk about some of these issues later. Right, opportunity to play was one of the primary reasons why people are selecting the school that they do. Ethics in recruiting, right? There are two prominent professional organizations for admissions representatives. And, again, you can look through those documents, the links are there. You can look through those on your own. And I can send the slides to anybody who wants them. But basically, too, right, the synopsis was accurate, truthful, complete information without misrepresentation. Now, some of the coaches that I talked to in the interviews talked about, well, why shouldn't the admissions counselors give bonuses? Let's do that. That really would go against the ethical norms in those things. Now, there would be, you can give the entire team some sort of bonus or incentive, but you can't give Tyreek a bonus and not give Janice a bonus, right? And then some of the, Hodem and James did a good study, a quantitative study, Likert scale, looking where they interviewed a lot, did survey work on a lot of different admissions representatives. And they talked about, some of the research was, these are the inviolable norms in our profession. That included institutional misrepresentation, all right, prohibiting the true portrayal of an institution. I'm going to offer a recent example, misrepresenting in print and conversations, and then dishonest recruitment practices, misrepresenting to make yourself look better. What wasn't really talked about was negative recruiting. And some of the coaches I interviewed really cite this as a problem as well. Again, where you're purposely talking down someone that, they're down, a recruit's down to your school and another school, so let's badmouth the other school, right? That's not part of Hodem and James' work, but still not good things. The recent example I wanted to give, so my daughter recently visited, she's a junior in high school, she's doing some of her college visits. I guess I won't identify where she visited, but hey, as the parent who knows the landscape at small private colleges in the Midwest, I asked the question, hey, how is your school handling this? They were very upfront and did say that 2 years ago they had to do a draw on their endowment, right? Which that's not a great sign typically when a school has to do that. Now, certainly, I don't think it's for them to volunteer that, but I appreciated that when asked that they said that. I've already done this presentation at a couple of different institutions, and at one of the institutions, some of their enrollment management team pretty much said, "I don't think I would have told them that," and they admitted, for good or for bad, we wouldn't have volunteered that. I'll leave it to the other professionals to determine what they think of that. Ethics in recruiting, Juniata College, Division III school in Pennsylvania, fairly solid athletic program. They used to be very good in volleyball, and I think they still are. This is on their website. These are things that they say that a coach and recruited student athlete should discuss. Roster size, again, number of returning players and starters, tryout procedures, the role in the team. And look at number 3. All right. If the recruited athlete is no longer a priority, they should be informed that someone else has chosen Juniata and is a better prospect, and don't simply stop calling. Meaning, basically, they're saying honest, transparent communication. We're no longer interested in you. I think what comes out very clear in the interviews is very few coaches I talked to would feel like they really would have the go-ahead from their institution to tell a prospect that. Some of the roles, more to come on this, right? Coaches, as Stevens indicated, really more and more, a lot of their role is like an admissions officer. That's what they're, in a sense, that's what they are. More to come. And then here on the admissions officer side, they're, again, I don't need to read that word for word. They're admission specialists that they're there to do a larger job than just get their enrollment numbers. Many of the quotes that the interviews would have said really question would have this happened. I think coaches sometimes see the enrollment staff as they get the class and then boom, they're not helping them transition at all. That all just gets dumped on coaches and student life and faculty because they're on to the next class. And Holcomb and James would say, well, maybe that's not really how it should be happening. Then congruence and conflict. All right. This was both were further supported with the interviews, that there can be tension, but there also can be some good feelings. Congruence. Now, part of the congruence is quid pro quo. Stevens, reported, hey, and his was a study on Division III admissions offices. If the soccer coach goes out of my way to help me with one of the recruits, and the hockey coach won't help me at all, who am I going to help more when it counts? This quid pro quo is still out there. Joint meetings and mixers, right? So make sure that everybody gets a chance to know each other. Conflicts. Stevens again would say acceptance of borderline students. That did not come up very much in my research. It came up a little bit, that sometimes there's some push and pull on that, but not as much as maybe I would have anticipated. I think though, and when it did come up, it came up more when I talked with admissions representatives and vice presidents of enrollment, et cetera. It didn't really come up from the coaches. And then from the interviews, what came up is, where there's some conflict, the timeliness and quality of financial aid packages, who gets to count the recruit toward the goals, and then the youth inexperience of turnover of admissions professionals, which kind of becomes a reoccurring theme. Here's a quote from Stevens. Again, like two partners in a stormy marriage, athletics and admissions are deeply intertwined, even though they might drive each other crazy. Some additional interviews that I did that were not coaches. So again, I had the pleasure to interview Professor Docking at Adrian College. He is the president there, has really done a great job turning it around. Dan Tudor runs a consulting service, very specific. And some of the schools, Tudor Collegiate and University of Dubuque and Buena Vista both have done some things with him. Mr. Paul Nelson is the athletic director at Benedictine College. His son also happens to be a student in our program. Doug Faulkner at Greenville College has been a dean. He's been an athletic director. He's been a coach. He's been a faculty member. So he's played a bunch of different roles. Martha Stolze is the is the director of admissions. My apologies, at Beloit College. And she has also had roles at North Central and at Augustana. And then Lauren Cichetti she's the assistant director of admissions at Newman University in Pennsylvania, but she has also been a women's soccer coach. And all those schools, right, are Division III schools. So again, and they all gave some great additional information. So let's get into the results. And here's how this is going to work, right? I'll bring up the interview question. Why did I ask it? Did any common themes emerge? And what strong quotes accentuated the point? First of all, here's some general themes that came out overall of all the questions. One, really the difference between individual and team sports, right? And I guess I mean, I knew there's differences, but it really hit home that when you run cross country, when you run track, when you compete in swimming, and even to a lesser extent in wrestling, you can get everybody on the roster involved. In cross country, you can run 8 varsity races. You don't run in conference. Otherwise, you can run in everything. In track and swimming, except that conference are very elite meets, you can get every athlete there. Basketball is not playing all 35 people, right? Baseball isn't playing their entire 50-man roster in varsity contests. So there's a big difference on that ability to get everyone involved a little bit more in game competition. Tension, yeah, tension exists unequivocally. The big thing that came up was the student athlete experience, right? That really from the coaches saying our roster sizes are getting so big, we can't deliver the experience that as a small college, we really should be. The ethics came up a little bit, and then just what is the role of the Division III coach today? So these were some general themes. We'll expand on these. So the first question here, right? Why did I ask it? I wanted just to get coaches talking about recruiting. Right? How would they describe their program's recruiting philosophy? There really weren't any common themes here. The answers were kind of all over the place. You see some of the things again, and I'm not going to read all the quotes word for word. I'll leave these up here. And again, you can certainly request if you want the slides without me talking. But you know, recruiting strategies are number one thing. We'll take everyone as long as the attitude's fine. Taking everyone's not the same as recruiting everyone. That comes up in some other places as well. Some other quotes, we'll meet with every admissions recruit. These are a chance to sell the college in our program. We want the family to feel good about both. The challenge is the family wants to talk playing time or status. I try to be clear on the difference between a recruited player and a walk-on player, but sometimes that message doesn't resonate. And again, our approach is to bring the best people, and here's what we're looking for. All right, so these were really some of the key quotes from that first question. And then the second question gets right into the nuts and bolts, right? Describe the perfect relationship between your staff and the college's admissions office, right? Why was it asked? Because this is a big part of what I'm trying to get at. Common themes. You have some coaches, really, I didn't record it an exact percentage, but there was a healthy percentage of both, of coaches that want to do it all and that really want admissions to have nothing to do with their recruitment efforts, other than financial aid, which they have to under D3 rules, versus others that were very happy to look for a healthy balance between the two. On visits, I think this also came up. Top recruit visits, coaches, a lot of coaches want admissions to stay out of the way. Quote unquote, the admissions recruit visits, little different, right? In terms of sometimes coaches really want nothing to do with these, all right? Or they're gonna handle it significantly different. Harmony versus frustration. A lot of frustration was exuded from the coaches about the admissions needs to recruit more non-student athletes. Right, there is, and as a faculty member and as a parent of student athletes and as someone who loves D3 sports, yeah, I think there is a tipping point at some point where sports becomes too dominant a part of the college's culture. I don't know where that is, right? I don't have a number in mind, but it makes which then can make it more difficult to recruit the non-student athletes if they think that they're not going to quite fit into that culture. So there really was some concerns expressed here. Reporting to the vice president of enrollment, you know, or a similar title. I know at Adrian, that's how they do things. I know at Cornell, they've moved to that model. And those models seem to be working for those schools, right? Where there was a little bit more harmonious. Now, one other common theme was, and this was encouraging, that everyone does see, or most people do see, that it is the college first. People want to help the college, as you know, survive, make it. Here's some of these quotes. All right, again, not reading it word for word. You know, used to be 50-50, but now it's 99-1. We want to do it all. I'll even be late for practice for it. Recruiting's a strength, but if admissions can help in these areas, that'd be great. Also, can they get more non-athletes? So much of my experience were the non-athletes. Ideally, it should work well. So again, these were some overall relatively innocuous quotes. Now we get to some other ones that maybe can't be described that way. Don't like admission, wants to haggle on financial aid at the beginning, give it out at a panic. 90% of the kids who commit in December will keep for 4 years. Only 10% of the kids who decide after, and I can't cite that source, right? I'm just relaying from the respondent. How is it not better to gamble to throw some more money at kids that want to be here? We don't want admissions contacting our recruits. They don't add value. They can be there to shake their hands. I set up the visits, they mess it up. The sheet will say, don't contact them. They do it anyway. They flood the kids' timelines with generic and automated messages that make us look bad. We're working on these kids. Why can't they get the kid that goes and plays the flute, right? So you see some dissonance here. For some of these were also from some administrators. The ideal relationship is that they'd have the strategic plan at heart. There's not enough expectations on what it means to be a Division III coach and how part of that role is to support enrollment. I'll talk about that later. We're seeing enrollment outside athletics down. How can we not get 100 non-athletes? The counselors need to get paid more and they should be out in the schools more. They change over all the time. We don't have a relationship with them. I understand the admissions job right now seems like basically a post-grad intern. We have good counselors, but it's hard to keep them. So again, that was a reoccurring theme. And I do think, right, and I haven't, at most of these schools, I think it is a reality. Again, more to come on that. Okay, the next question. How is the optimal roster size of your program determined? Again, I really wanted to get at, who's making the decisions here as part of this relationship. There'll be some data on the next slide. And then some common themes. Again, it goes back to the experience. We don't have the space, the facilities, the staffing for them. And then again, that if you can't deliver the experience, you will use a sport management example here. Again, this is from a long time ago, right? And we've been fortunate to do some good things here in our sport management program, winning national championships and things of that nature. Well, I don't know, about 10 years ago. And our numbers have always kind of stayed around that 60 mark. Maybe now with some 50 years, and the whole COVID situation, maybe a little higher. Well, we had a vice president of enrollment that said, well, we want you to get to 90. And I tried to explain, well, if we get to 90, it means we have to change our course rotation. We have to offer courses more. And I said, more importantly, right now, I know all 60, our faculty, we know all 60 of our students. We know their hometowns. We know what sports they play. We know what they're doing. Like this summer, I'll know what everyone's doing. You get to 90, you change that dynamic, right? It's kind of like just because you have one successful restaurant doesn't mean you should open up a second restaurant. And the response was, well, and of course, vice presidents of enrollment have no authority here at Loras College to get us a third faculty member. Well, I'll increase your staffing. Now, this person didn't last long, but that was just one example, right? Where, and again, I've even had some conversations about that example, and I did get some pushback from other schools and their enrollment directors. Well, yeah, if you're doing good things, we want you to get more students. I think now again, I'm getting on a horse here, and I just watch that. I think there is a thing, just because something's good doesn't mean it gets better with larger numbers. All right. Budget. More athletes equals more issues. The more athletes we get, the more likely you're going to have problem athletes, which takes away from our time. And then football and this is why, again, it was unfortunate that I couldn't talk to more football coaches, because a lot of football got talked about a lot by coaches and by administrators that, hey, when the school is struggling, let's just ask football to get us more. Not quite sure how fair that is related to football staffs, but that's the perception out there. That football can save the day whenever we need them to. So how is the optimal roster size determined? Again, what was interesting with this, I would talk to about 6 coaches at each school, 4 to 6, and different coaches representing the same school would have different answers. So I don't know if that was a communication issue or if different coaches at the same school are being held to different standards. But as you can see from this, roughly 2/3 of the respondents, either the school is making the decision or the school is having a part of the decision, i.e. both. All right, so it's rare that a coach at the Division III level has complete control over their roster size. Here's some quotes. It's determined for me. I don't get any say. We have to run split practices, which isn't giving kids a good experience. They increase our recruiting goals, but cut our budgets. How does that make any sense? More support and understanding. We just can't carry numbers and give kids a positive experience. All right. we've negotiated a bit. If I get to here, I get some help. Hard to make seventh stringers happy. And my AD knows this. I can still sleep at night because I've at least communicated these points. Don't know. We get asked what we can handle, and that's higher than what I want. Can't draw it. It's hard to draw at practice. Goes above my pay grade. Don't know where it really comes from. So again, you see the common theme here. Next question along those lines. Do you have the ability to cut student athletes or hold tryouts if your roster gets too big, and why or why not? Again, same thing. It goes along with this whole thing of roster size. Some common themes here were fall athletes, training camp start, right? And so do you cut kids right during training camp and send first years back home? Ethics comes up, retention, right? And there was a lot of stuff on retention where I think there was this understanding that hey, nobody expects us to be able to keep everybody on our roster. The hope is, though, they stay at the school. Terminology and communication, tryouts, travel team, dress team, can you dress? That helps. Other roles in the program, and then JV teams, right? I think that also comes up a little bit of that importance. And again, with the sample study, there were some schools, right? At Loras, at UD, at Co, at Cornell, in the eastern part of the state, it's a little bit easier to schedule some of those JV games, right? At Buena Vista, to maybe, and at Luther, it's a little bit more costly, right? In terms of the travel, because they just don't have as many schools in their immediate area or community colleges to play, et cetera. Again, maybe a little bit surprising from the previous slide, but roughly 2/3 of the coaches indicate that they can cut or hold tryouts. 8 couldn't, and 6 of those 8 all came from one school. All right. So really then you take away the one school, there really is the majority of other coaches do feel that they do have that ability. But just because they have the ability doesn't mean that it's happening. And I think that's important. I don't think cutting is happening. I think just coaches feel like they have the ability to do so. I can't cut once they're here, but during the search, we can say we're full if we've hit our numbers. Kind of like, the school in Pennsylvania, Juanita would say that is the way to do it. Could cut a complete walk-on if we told him it was a tryout. Yes, we can cut Juniata. Sorry about that. Yes, we can cut should someone really be a drill killer. That term came up a lot. And as a former coach, I know exactly what the type of players are talking about. Wouldn't do it until school started. This was a fall sport because you can't send a first year back home. Most of the time, these student athletes do cut themselves. It'd be frowned on if we don't take a kid on, especially if they go somewhere else. I have the permission, but the challenge of me cutting a kid who we told to have a roster spot. We've doubled our roster since I'm here. So now I'm comfortable in the recruitment telling a roster filler that we're full. And I'm always communicating that with admissions is in terms of where we're at with goals. Wave to a colleague there. Athletic director gives me the okay to cut kids after they're here, but personally that's tough for me ethically. So we have sneaky cutting. And I think what this coach meant by that was, it was again, a fall sport. They'll cut them in the spring after their first year. And I know, again, outside the research scope, but just from experience, I know coaches that if you're still on JV as a junior, they cut you then. All right. I think that's what this coach is talking about here. No cuts or tryouts. AD doesn't overtly say that, but we know the goal is to tell a kid they can't play. But we have the conversations on the depth chart. Again, I think one of the things too, going back to individual and team sports, track and field and swimming reported a lot. They can sit down with the recruit, and this comes up a little bit later as well. So maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, where you can look at the times. Here's what our people are swimming. Here's what you're swimming, right? A little bit more cut and dry. Athletic director may support it, but admissions wouldn't until they had completed their first year. After that, they don't really, my last player is a drill killer. Sometimes they can't practice with us, but I would only cut for culture. And no one's ever suggesting, hey, if a kid's you've given a kid a student athlete every possible chance possible, and they really are disrupting team chemistry, that you can't cut them. I make it work for the drill killer to do our part for the college. It gets harder as our program gets better. And then due to COVID, I didn't cut just as a way to help people out. So how do you communicate with these student athletes that you would evaluate them as someone who's never going to contribute at the varsity level, but for otherwise would be a good fit for the college? Again, this is where I want to get at. Says, what's this communication like? Is it ethical? What's going on here? Because again, you do talk to student athletes, and sometimes families don't hear the right message. All right. I mean, not all families have that experience. Again, I go back to my own experience with my oldest son, who wound up going to play baseball for basically 2 years at Simpson, all in these COVID years. We knew during his recruitment, I knew, he knew, the coaches knew that he was an admissions recruit. All right. Not all families have that wherewithal. All right. So what's this going on with this communication? Right. There is, again, ethics comes up, common themes, the difference between the message offered and received. Again, here's where I got ahead of myself. Sports with times or scores, and tennis also has a world ranking where, you know, wherever you're at, you can kind of see where you're at. And I think those coaches felt it was a little bit easier. The location of the visit, that'll come up. And then tiers. At least one school has a very clear tiered system with recruits in their communication with admissions. Others, a lot of the schools in their software package have things where coaches can kind of tell the admissions rep, yeah, this person, this male or female isn't really a priority for us. Top recruits get a different message, right? Their commitment's assumed. Don't have to talk about the summer stuff as much. This was a fall sport. What we send kids isn't different, but we certainly spend more time with them. And also we may reimburse them as part of the official visit, which, you know, you can do at the Division III level. It doesn't happen frequently. We put the ball in their court, meaning the player, the prospect's court during a visit. I tell them they're not on my recruiting contacts list until they get me a resume and film. And most won't. If the talent gap is clear, then I'm clear. Parents appreciate that. And then talked about a recruit they had, you know, how the dad was a student athlete who felt he got hoodwinked and so appreciated the honesty. I'll meet with them, but we'll be honest in telling them they may not make the team. And if their sport is a big deal to them, they should consider alternatives. I think that was pretty much a minority view. I don't think most coaches felt empowered enough to be able to be that direct. I'm as excited about a one-star recruit as a four-star. We want them here. All right. It's positive. People help. Third tier go, you know, again, this was a school where they tier it. Third tier as low as we go. They're going to get a half-hour visit as opposed to 2.5 hours. We'll still answer questions and be courteous. A lot of the kids that don't, you know, weren't recruited, that don't travel on their team, don't make the travel squad, but think they were based on one 30-minute conversation. Again, just like the student that really was the impetus for this, who had one 30-minute conversation with the assistant coach and thought that meant that he was a recruit. We try to do those conversations in admissions and not in our offices. Other coaches said, this is the only quote that I'm saying, but other coaches were saying this, that they purposely will go up to the admissions office to meet with those recruits, not bring them down their way. And then in bold, purposely in bold, hard for me to look at a kid and know I don't want her, right? That really, to me, is a profound message of what this is all about, right? Where coaches feel pressured to take on student athletes that they really don't want in their program. I'll let that one sink in a little bit. I put it on them to communicate to us, right? We'll talk about JV. You know, again, I may offer a different tone. However, I'm not going to be the person who makes them dislike our school and go somewhere else, right? So again, coaches get it. They do. Okay, now the next question was, how does the way you communicate with these student athletes, these roster fillers, how does it correlate with how you think admissions would prefer you communicate? Again, it's all going into, again, this whole thing on the messaging. Common themes, right? The software, which I've mentioned, that a lot of these schools have software where all this can get coded. Ethics was respected. And that was very positive for me to find out. In other words, yes, these coaches have pressure to hit numbers, but there isn't the pressure from admissions to tell Julie, the soccer recruit who can't play a lick, that there isn't pressure for the coach to really sell Julie a bag of goods. There's some negativity that comes up here, right? So again, part of that disclaimer. And then also the social media graphic, we'll get to that. I think this first quote really kind of is a big synopsis of what else is out. Hey, if you're hitting your numbers, you can message any way you want. If you're not hitting your numbers, you probably can't say you're not going to meet a third tier student on a visit. Again, here's where some of, don't know and don't care. They're cutting our budget, so I'm not taking any more than I need. We already have too many. Trying to figure out what to do with those 3.5s. All right. One of our coaches thinks the counselors give their best financial aid packages to the 4s to help their own numbers. The rumor was a former coach got fired for labeling 1s and 2s as a 4s to get them better financial aid, right? And this is rumor, right? And of course, I'm not naming the school or the coach here. It can come off as adversarial. Hey, I have leverage, I exceed my goals. In the end, I'm a young coach trying to establish myself, so I don't worry too much about what they want. They're not going to help me get there. I would presume they respect what I do. Anyone who says they don't want enrollment to grow isn't here for the right reasons. Students equals money equals competitiveness. The next one, and again, two-way street. They're not going to give the weak student the presidential award, so they can't me to take the kid who absolutely can't play. And then here's, again, in bold, this comes up, this came up a lot. It came up more in team sports than it did in the individual sports. We will not give our lesser recruits and not the tryout kids the social media graphic announcing their intention, right? And that's a bigger deal these days. So basically, and why they don't want to do that is because there's this perception, real or not, that if other recruits on their board see that Tyrone or Hector or Jill is coming and that person is not, considered to be that good, then all of a sudden then people think less of your program. Well, gosh, if Hector can go play there, they must not be that good. So I probably need to go look elsewhere. I'm just relaying the perception that's out there. But again, what a strong message. We're going to give you a roster spot, but we think so little of you. We don't want you to eat. We're embarrassed that you announced that you're coming to our school. There's something wrong with the system that happens. All right. In my opinion, some of you are probably nodding in agreement and some of you are probably frustrated that I'm saying that. All right. That's the beauty of this though. So what did admissions folks say on this same question? Coaches want to vet kids first. That's not always possible. We may ask coaches to offer someone a tryout, and it's important to have that sort of terminology. Fall sports are a challenge. My goal in my coaching days was to get them to move in day and then cut them. Yikes, I don't know that ethically I like that. That is what somebody said who works in admissions. Try to be respectful of the coach's time. If they can't play, it's program by program. Some of our team numbers are so low, their coaches want to talk with anyone. And that's part of, again, that's part of the admissions folks knowing those coaches. And some of those will come up in some recommendations later. This question here, do members of the campus community outside your staff have the go-ahead to discuss playing time? Has this been respected? Ultimately, why this was a bad question, and you see that there on the slide, is because I already got the gist of this before we even got to question number 7. So I didn't even ask this of everyone because it was kind of already answered in so many of the interviews. I really should have done a pilot study. All right, it's another limitation and it might have fleshed that out a little bit. But there weren't many common themes. It's not breached, but sometimes, sometimes they have their own goals and they get overzealous. I'd blow a gasket if that was the case. We don't use the term walk, we don't use the term walk on and don't like using the concept making an offer, but must keep up with the others. And you see that out there, right? That again, Division III, people accepting an offer. Again, without sharing things, I know some administrators here don't like that at all. They think it is very contrary to the whole Division III notion. I'm not sure I agree with that, but it's interesting that this particular Division III coach also doesn't like that. But again, as we'll get to, it's almost what parents are expecting as part of the recruiting game. And then here's the close. What else would you like to say about the working relationship between your program and the college's admissions office, specific to what we were talking about? Again, I asked because I really wanted to, who knows, they might have other thoughts that they wanted to indicate, and most did, all right? Common theme, what I just kind of talked about, families today. Common theme is that families today have different expectations. The recruitment is more important to them. The announcement with that recruitment is more important. We'll get to some quotes on that. Coaches want a louder voice. All right. I think Maybe it's the money ball version of college sports, where again, where coaches feel like they're becoming more and more middle managers. And that's not historically what their role has been. And a lot of coaches feel like they're not getting to say. The role of the coach comes up. And then who gets to count someone? All right. At schools where, and I mean, admissions has numbers everywhere, but again, sometimes that comes up. We'll expand on that. And I've included some administrator responses in this. I wish we had more say. It all gets decided for us. We want more money out of less kids than get more kids. And in my sport, socioeconomically, that approach hurts us. We're getting killed on financial aid packages. Budget plays a role. If you don't up the budget, then every kid you get hinders the experience that you're providing. And in the long term, with alumni engagement, that's what we're about. I think there is that long-term model has to be included as part of that. We're seeing more travel players want to commit before we can vet them. Families have a lot invested. They want to promote their child's commitment more than determining the best fit. Anecdotally, as someone who has kids who are 21, 19, and 17, and who've been very active in youth sports, I would concur with this. Seeing this more from the lower athlete these days, not just the high one. All right. And they do pay attention to who else is being recruited. Lost a recruit because on social media, some admissions kid committed who played the same position, right? So I do think for families, it's more of an investment. That's why that whole thing of being offered a roster spot, I think does matter to them. Well, I know it does. At times, I wonder if it's worth sharing all this information with admissions. If they see you're working hard on them, they might back off and not give them great financial aid. Is it helping me to put that out there? It's all okay as long as we don't need another bus. At the end of the day, our roster size is our livelihood. We need one admissions rep dedicated to helping the coach with athletes, and that's it. Not putting my paycheck in the hands of a 23-year-old. It must be recognized that I'm here to coach a sport first and foremost. This is the only time I'm putting it there. That was a common theme. I'm a coach. We'll get some other responses to that. Here's some from administrators. You have to have an enrollment management mindset, not just an admissions mindset, that all the way thinks through alumni engagement. Parents are willing to pay for their kid to play a sport as opposed to pay for education, right? We just saw that. The coaches think that too. McMurray, which closed, wasn't paying attention to what was happening with their academic reputation in their attempts to secure enrollment. Again, I'm not going to name the school here on this recording, but there's one school that is reasonably close, I guess, in the Midwest. But I personally am real concerned with talking to some of the faculty and ways where the school is trying to be saved with doing some things with sports that they've really dropped the bar. That is certainly in no way to say that student athletes aren't great students, because I think in most cases we know that they are. In bold, right? So kind of a rebuttal to some of the coaches that say, hey, I'm here to coach. Probably not the place for you if you don't think you're an admissions counselor first. The W or L on your head is meeting your recruitment goals, right? So there is a disconnect, and it goes back to one of the early slides where maybe there needs to be more education on what it means to be a D3 coach in the year 2022. So I'm going to offer some recommendations now. All right. Thanks for your patience listening to all the data. Some recommendations to 4 groups: coaches, enrollment management personnel, higher education institutions, and athletes and families. Coaches. All right. And I do bemoan it. But the ship has sailed. The ship has sailed that you are not playing that your job is not large role in admissions counselor. So thus, I think it becomes more important now to mentor assistants, to mentor the students that we have in our online graduate Masters of Coaching Leadership program. Quick plug for that. If any of you have any students interested in our program, let me know. That this is what Division III coaching is. And junior varsity programs. Again, I think one thing that I saw, that there are some coaches out there that, a few that really just look at their JV program as a complete whatever. That's the admissions kids. You can't play them all equal. You've got to love them all equal. And that can be challenging. I recognize that. But I think junior varsity programs have to be as robust as possible. I know in spring sports, right, with rain and all that kind of stuff, that it can be difficult. And of course, though, that means that the college has to put the money behind that as well. Enrollment management personnel. I strongly believe they need to have a non-athlete goal. Some schools have it. Other schools, part of the study, do not. But again, and that doesn't mean, of course, you're still working together on the athletes, but there needs to be a goal. Because again, if a coach is doing all 90% of the legwork on a recruit and you get to count them, and let's say if your goal 90% are athletes and the coaches, is that really fair? Right. So I think there does need to be a little bit of a non-athlete goal. But then there has to be clear policies concerning who gets to count a prospect. At one school, right, it was if you're a 1, 2, or 3, the coach gets it. If you're a 4, their admissions counselor gets it. At another school, they said it all depends on what the student athlete puts down first on their extracurriculars. If they put down football or swimming or golf, the coach gets to count it. If they put down choir or student government, they don't. All right. Not sure what the best is, but there just needs to be a clear policy. Institutions, you need to find ways to increase frontline admission staff longevity. All right. And certainly these are entry-level jobs, right? And no one's going to, but they might not stay 5 to 10 years. But the constant turnover where people aren't even staying a year, right? This is your primary sales staff that you're investing in. And I do, it really is, a lot of folks are saying it's gravitating to a post-grad internship. That's not what it should be. Consider moving athletics to enrollment management if you haven't done so. I know every school is structured different. And there was one school, again, where athletics reports directly to the president, and it works at that particular school. Recognize that the student athlete experience matters in the long run. You're playing the long game. I know in the short term, the wiki data cliff and all that there are legitimate challenges. To the best you can, you still have to play the long game, and that student athlete experience matters. Even if they don't stay on the team all 4 years, you want them to have a positive experience when they're participating. And to that end, I do firmly believe roster sizes at most of these schools are incongruent with positive experiences. Sport by sport, certainly not every case. I'm making a general theme that I think that roster sizes in a lot of sports is too high. And I understand why from a school standpoint, school survival standpoint, doesn't change my belief. Families, and I know there's some families watching this. During your recruitment, you need to ask direct questions about, instead of just asking, hey, how do you think my son or daughter is going to fit into your program? Ask to see their junior varsity schedule. All right. Ask who's coaching the junior varsity. Is it a full-time coach? Is it a student coach? What have you? Ask about the recruitment graphic. If my son or daughter comes there, how are we allowed to announce it? I think you're going to, force the coaches, and this is an anti-coach, force the coaches to really not just give you the canned answers. And then also you need to comprehend the Division III model, right? Your son or daughter, if they're picking the school for athletics, exclusively, they're picking the school for the wrong reason. And I'm comfortable saying that. So again, it really, their decisions should be on the institution as a whole. Conclusion. All right. Final thoughts. I love doing it. All right. I learned a lot. I really want to expand this. So the future research, I'd love to broaden this out beyond Iowa. Because again, I think the Iowa schools kind of represent just one snapshot of competitive athletic programs. I think it's important to get the student athletes in the conversation. That was my original plan. One of the ADs really nixed that and said, we don't want you talking to our student athletes and making them feel like they're second-class citizens. And I get that, and I respect that. But somehow I think we still have to get that out there. So that's some future research. I'm more than willing, again, to if there's anyone out there that wants to attempt at some collaboration on step B, hey, give me a jingle. Email me. There's my email. Thank you to all who participated. Thank you to all who are listening. And definitely feel free to contact me with questions. I'm going to stop the share. I'm going to stop the recording and hope that when we had that little technology glitch that we didn't lose things. Thank you very much. Have a good day.